Welcome to another episode of Black Box. I'm your host, Mbali Mashachane, and today we are in episode 3. Today we're going to talk about the Africa we want and how we're going to create it. Things are a bit different today. We have a smaller panel because we're going to critically discuss how we as African youth want to improve our continent, our country, and how we can better it for tomorrow.
And I'm your host, Sibusisiwe Kumbaka, and today we will be tackling the leadership in Africa and also whether our youth truly have voices. So today we have our two panelists, and on my right we have Sibuile, who is a politics honors student, and also Zanele, who is an ecos honors student.
And they're going to just help us talk about this topic of the Africa we want and how we're going to improve Africa, or even if we can as the youth. So the first question today is, as the youth, we're very vocal on our perspective on our leaders, our government, the political parties that exist, but then our participation in the last vote in South Africa was not even a third. One third of us voted. Isn't that not problematic? And can we have an opinion on creating a better Africa if we are so silent? Or was that a political strategy from the youth side? I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that.
Okay. I think I'll start off with this one. I think for some, it's not necessarily a thing of we don't want to participate, but it's sort of we feel as if there's nothing we can do because certain party's gonna win nonetheless. And that one thought for one person becomes a thought for many others, and then we end up having an impact. And then also at the same time, you find those that just don't vote as a political strategy, as a way of saying, I'm not satisfied with the choices that I've been given in this democracy that we have. Yeah.
I agree. So then what do we do? Or can we even ask for a better Africa then? Because now, if only 1/3 of us voted, if all of us voted, we could have changed the current government. So, or is that us saying we don't want any of the options that are there? No way.
Yeah, I think the problem is we think there is a choice, right? Or rather, the set of choices we've been given are probable, and I think it's like having to choose between two devils or multiple devils. And I think that's the problem for a lot of young people, and also looking at things like the unemployment level that affects most of the youth. It's almost like there's really no outlet for my anger, there's no outlet for my choices really. So I think that's the main problem. So in terms of wanting to create a better Africa, whether we kind of maybe compromised ourselves in not voting, maybe we did, but I think more than anything it's had a powerful voice. Sometimes silence, sometimes not doing something is actually having a bigger impact. So that's just my take on it.
Yeah.
And also, the youth have been excluded so many times when it comes to the leadership and the politics as well. You find that there's most of the older generation rather than the youth, because, I don't know, there's just some level of trust, I guess. And, yeah.
And I think also the reduction of everything to merely just voting in itself is quite problematic in the current spaces that we live in. We are tired of just knowing that the only time we can make a difference is every 5 years when you have the opportunity to do so. It's, things have to change.
Yeah, that is problematic.
Just kind of
Yeah.
I think also not seeing people that look like you or that resonate with you.
Sure.
Like what she touched on with seeing an older generation being the dominant players in politics. They don't look like us. They don't really. There's a disconnect in terms of struggles.
Yeah.
And I think that's even in policy making. There's a disconnect between what the majority of South Africans need and what the policymakers are actually implementing.
Yeah.
There's a mismatch there, and that's one of the main problems in South Africa, is that the policy does not match the actual demand in South Africa and the needs of many South Africans. So I'm glad that I'm seeing a lot more people, a lot more young people, more of my peers going into the political space, you know, Naledi Cheras, all of those going into in the political space, because we're starting now to see people that look like us in parliament. We're starting to see our age mates in parliament, so we're starting to be like, maybe now I can participate in the political conversation. So that's another big aspect of it.
Yeah, age actually does have a huge factor. But that's also continentally. We have a thing of having old leaders because they somehow have wisdom. But I also think that's an African that's an African narrative, because we see the elder so highly. Like, just culturally, we hold our elders highly. So I think also we've taken that into our leadership, but then there's a lack of innovation that comes with that idea, because I think maybe we need each other. We need the vibrant youth, active youth, and the wise voice to correlate in order to create something. Okay, so like the next question is like, so we have everything. We have platforms to voice ourselves. We have opportunities to be active, and we as the youth are generating other ways to be active in different spheres. I just want to like now see as an Africa as a whole. So Nkosazana Zuma has this dream of 2063, where she says Africa will be a better Africa once we are united, and once we can trade freely among African continents. We will be better once we can create true innovation and educate everyone. Is that even possible? And is 2063 an accurate date for such a dream? Because isn't that a now issue?
I'll say the continent does have a lot of potential. And it's not, we're not in a bad situation, but we're not in a good one either, in a way. So I think there is potential, but in terms of 2063, I'm a bit doubtful. It again goes back to what my sister here just mentioned, the policies that they're making. They're so far down the line that most of them won't probably be even alive for us to hold them accountable.
True.
And they don't resonate with what is happening on the ground most of the time. So I think the continent does have potential, and we can achieve it if we're serious about where we are and who we are, and the countries on the continent are serious about getting their house in order, which means fixing political, economic, like all types of spheres or sectors within the society. Because I think when we're imagining an Africa, it must go way beyond just the politics and the economics. Some way or somehow it must reach the household, and that's where things have to change.
That's so true.
That's a good point. But like, don't you think in order to like, I don't know, like, be able to handle Africa as a continent, don't you think we have to start as a country first? Because as a country, we're still struggling alone to lead ourselves and like adapt and, you know, just just to survive. Now we want a whole continent. Now we're talking about unity as a continent, but then there's no unity as the country itself.
I think like this whole nationalism is the problem, because I'm only the way I am as a South African because I'm nationalized to think that South Africa is a certain way, and we have this pride that we have to keep. Whereas if we were socialized and taught to think that in Africa was one, there could be more productivity, because I wouldn't deem myself as a superior. I think South Africans do deem themselves as superior. So the superior complex that I have as a South African would be like eradicated. It wouldn't be there. So I think I could work more with other countries to improve us as a whole. Like, it wouldn't be a problem to see a Zimbabwe be better or anything be better. Like, trade would be easier. Everything would be easier. That's personally,
I think I do agree with you on that, because when we sort of speak about how we want to change the continent, we sort of have this image of South Africa and what it has, and we sort of want to apply it to the rest of the other countries. And sometimes we'll maybe look at the specific context within those countries, and sometimes we won't. So there is that thing of when we're speaking of a better Africa, we sort of use South Africa as the benchmark or like the yardstick. We are a good country with a great constitution and a democracy and all those things, but yeah, it has to be inclusive of everyone if we are to go forward.
So we're going to continue on this talk of 2063 because there's a lot of problems about it. Personally, I think it's too much of a dream, and Africa needs to stop dreaming. We need to be in a position of action and actually implementing things, because we've been in this imaginary phase for very long, and it's not right that we expect our youth to continue dreaming. We are an active youth that have the ability to do things, so why aren't we letting them do things? And yeah, personally, it's not for me. And Nkosazana Zuma's policy, will she be around to see its fruits? And that's a question. Why is it so far? 44 years from now is problematic.
Yeah, I had an issue as well with the actual date, like the 2063, as to why that particular year. But also, I think I read a statistic like recently from I think UNESCO, could have been UNESCO, I can't remember. But they were saying that Africa has the biggest growing population, like the rate at which the population is growing, it's so quick that by 2030, 90% of poor people are going to be in Africa, right? So they're going to be from Africa. And I'm like, those are pressing issues. That's like now,
Yeah.
you know, and we're making policies for 40 years. And I'm like, who's going to be around to see that?
Yeah.
And another thing is also like, other pressing issues, climate change. Like, that's where we need to be. Food security. That's where our focus needs to be. If we have so many poor people, and we have water as an issue as well, you know. Those for me are pressing issues, not railway stations in 40 years. Well, that's a great, vision to have. It's like, it's not a pressing issue, you know. What people eat, how people make their livelihoods, that for me is much more of a pressing issue, yeah.
Yeah. I also think our politics is also so rooted in being presented properly. We are I think as a continent, we know how to word our documents beautifully. We are masters of presentation, but we are not masters of implementation. And that's so problematic because, as you highlighted, people who do not speak this elite language of knowledge won't understand why a railway station is going to be built instead of them getting water, electricity, and basic things like food. So that's also a problem. It's an African problem.
Yeah, we're very good at selling dreams, in a way. We're very good at doing that. And I think another thing with this whole policy thing is that it's so far off the line that we can never sort of hold the leader accountable now and ask, where's the railway station? Because the answer will always be, it's coming in the next 40 years. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Up until there's a new AU chairperson, for instance, who then comes with a new policy. So now when we say we want to hold Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma accountable, she's like, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm no longer in the game. Someone else is in the game, and they've changed the policies. And I think it not only becomes a continental problem, but it also becomes a sort of state problem, like a country problem.
Yeah.
We're still waiting to find out what is radical economic transformation in South Africa. Something that was announced during the Zuma stage.
Yeah.
We're still wanting to know what it was now with the whole Cyril coming in, and there's no continuity. And we're good at selling dreams, I would say.
So as the youth, let's say I want to be a leader. I'm looking up at these leaders. What tools do I have to implement for myself to be better? Because clearly they've only been masters of teaching me how to dream. And what tool do I have to create a better place? Or is that even possible? Or should that even be a question that I ask for myself? Or is Africa and J going to be that dark continent for so long? As you've highlighted, we're going to be the most poorest continent in the next, let's say, 10 years with the growing population. So is this having even this conversation necessary, or are we just going to populate this country and continent with
No, I think that's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of questions there. Firstly, is the conversation necessary? Definitely. I think, highlighting these issues and figuring out, and also the spaces that we are in, very much privileged to be in, to spark up these conversations, to find the solutions to them. So yeah, very, very necessary. I do think, what was the other question?
Like
so I was going to get to the fact that I think leadership in Africa is just absolutely hard. The standard of leadership, the number of leaders we can look to and say they've been influential is so minute. Like there's a small percentage of leaders that you can say are amazing. And I think that's the problem, is that the leadership, or rather the standard of leadership that we've allowed to prosper for so long, to dominate for so long, has created this precedent that everyone else just seems to follow. And I don't think we've had leadership that's radical, and for me, radical being that kind of goes against what everyone else has been doing, that destroys the precedent, that says, my people first, my country first, my continent first. We haven't had that in a while. I mean, we can go back to the Kwame Nkrumah's, that was that other generation, but the generations following that, we've had very few leaders that are influential, and I think that's the problem with this continent, is the leadership standard is very out of whack.
Yeah.
But now I was just gonna ask, what kind of leadership do you want or wish for?
I want leadership that's active, right? Leadership that's not reactionary, but works to prevent things, that doesn't only speak after things have happened. I want leadership that connects with its people. I want leadership that knows what its people's needs are. I don't want leadership that's there at union buildings and then everyone else is in Alex and everyone else is in Lang. Okay, I want leadership that connects with the people and understands what people want, that's on the ground. Leadership that's radical, like I said, radical, that goes against everything that other leaders have done and doesn't allow for the precedent that's been set. And I want leadership that's about bettering people's lives, about taking chances, taking the necessary risks for South Africans to prosper, for Africans to prosper. That's the type of leadership that I want to see. Yeah.
I also think a tool that is necessary in our leadership is education, but not education that is corrected in wording, but we need moral education.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
African leaders do not have moral education. They know the virtues that exist and they present things that are in those directions, but they don't necessarily capture those things.
But why is that? Because I would think, as much as we can get into a whole debate about morality and being a politics student, I'm sure, they know it better, or philosophy student, morality is quite subjective, but I think knowing the difference between right and wrong is an innate thing, unless you're a sociopath, which then
I think
kind
it's
of hard.
allowed.
But I'm just kind of why is it that so many African leaders, why would you need moral education? I would assume that you know what is right and what is wrong, and yet you still choose to do what is wrong.
I think we socially I think our history has put us in a position where we have goals. I speak from a black perspective. As a black person, I'm taught to reach a goal. My mom would tell me, this is what you have to do, this is what you do. I'm goal driven, I'm a survivor. Everything I want is like that. And so as a leader, I think you have those same properties. You are goal driven, but in being goal driven, you lose a part of yourself, because in reaching those goals, you're going to be challenged morally by a lot of things. And if you're just seeking to tick a box, those moral things that you weren't necessarily looking to understand are now going to be very problematic. And that, I think we just need moral education. I don't know how.
And I think it's when it comes to making moral decisions, we always tend to want to weigh them. Yeah. It's never a matter of, I'm going to do what's right all the time.
At any cost,
Is doing what's right working? Is it going to work for me? Or can I do what's wrong and then also get these benefits? Yeah. And I think it also goes back to why they don't change. these leaders don't change, why African leaders don't speak out against each other when other leaders are abusing their people. There's that thing of, I can speak out, but then the rest of the continent will shut me out and say, you South Africa, you think you're better than us now, you're the West. But if you do speak out, you actually can sort of maybe in a way try and improve things or something like that. But to just stand back and be like, that's not my country, let them solve their own issues while people are being killed and you can see everything. Yeah, nah.
I think
It's
what's
just-
an interesting thing is the fact that I've always thought maybe African leaders were not prepared. And what I mean by that is that with a lot of African countries, there was a struggle, you know, and then they had to fight the struggle and then overcome and then get into leadership.
Yeah.
But they never went beyond what happens after the struggle. So when they got to the leadership part, it was awkward because now they didn't know what to do. So while I'm not making excuses for bad leadership, I am saying that there's an element of lack of preparedness that comes into play when these people ended up having to now lead countries. It was, we were MK in Angola somewhere in the trenches, and now we had to be in government and make policies. And it's like now we don't know where to go. So there's a lack of preparedness in that aspect. And yeah, I think that's something to like actually assess.
I may have a problem, like a slight problem with the matter of the argument about African leaders sort of not being prepared to take up their position, because sometimes you find, for instance, in our own country, we have had over how many? We've had 3 presidents within this democracy. So someone can't come around and say, I didn't know what to do, or they're unaware of what is going on the ground, because they've been in the movements, they've been around the country, they know the situation. So for one to claim I wasn't prepared.
Can I clarify my point?
Yeah.
Maybe you misunderstood. What I was speaking to was, so the movement as a whole, so for example, like ANC as a whole, when they then came into power, it became different than operating on the grounds and, you know, speaking to the people on the ground and, you know, and doing whatever they were doing before 1994. When they then had to move into parliament, I'm saying maybe was there a lack of preparedness about how that worked, how that system worked, and what was required of them then. Do you know what I mean? That's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah,
I still disagree.
I'm still disagreeing. There's this thing of whereby they have these conferences like every 4 or 2 years, I'm not sure, where they discuss current issues and what is going on and what the plan will be going forward, so that when the next leader comes in, he already knows that at this conference we discuss this, and that. For instance, free education. I think at one conference it did come up and it was discussed, but it took a very long time to get implemented. The incoming president of the time, Jacob Zuma, he knew it was supposed to happen, but he took his time. If it were not for the fees must fall protest, I'm not sure if we would have free education in the country, if it is free in any case. So there's that thing of you're claiming you're unprepared, but every couple of 4 years there's sort of a revision session with your party, within your party. So yeah.
Okay, I get you.
We'll leave it at that.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things on our leadership. So let's say we imagine a new leader and we draw him here. What properties do we think he has to have? Like maybe we can each say one thing that could then generate him. Or is the idea of having leadership the problem? Because when you have someone in such a high position, is he not going to then be disconnected just from that position itself?
Okay, first I think we need to define leadership in terms of, because I think anyone can be called a leader in whatever space they occupy, right? So I think we need to just clarify.
Okay, so
by that.
Leader, let's say political leader who's gonna lead in Africa to a better place, or let's say South Africa. So we didn't vote as the youth, right? And we're saying it's because the options there weren't for us. They weren't speaking to us necessarily to a lot of things that we need. So therefore, if there was no Cyril Ramaphosa, who would we want to create? Like, who would be better than Cyril Ramaphosa from our, like, because we're imaginative.
Yes.
Let's be imaginative on this topic and draw this leader. Will he fulfill those needs even if we draw him up? Because I'm just saying, isn't the idea of having leadership and having someone in a hierarchical position the problem? Because he's going to be disconnected, or she's going to be disconnected in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Nah, like, I get you. Like, I get that. And I do agree somewhat that whole, someone is higher and then you have the rest of us on the ground. We feel helpless at some way or somehow. And we feel as if the only power we have is by telling this person what is wrong. And then whether they fulfill it or they sort of right these wrongs is dependent upon them. We don't feel as if like we can make a difference sometimes, which is probably why we take to the streets at times, because we feel we're not being listened to, and the only way that they will listen is if we disrupt the system or the things going on ahead as they usually do. So, yeah.
I hear you guys, but I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm disagreeing with what you're saying. I think the way it's structured might be a problem, but I think, okay, you do need to have hierarchies in some instances, right? If you do organizational culture and organizational structures, you need to have that, right? So someone reports to someone reports and someone touches the ground. But I think the culture you create may allow for access between the people on the ground and the person at the top, right? And that's what I mean by active leadership and by someone who's connected to the people. Right? Is that if you are very intentional about your style of leadership, then all of these other steps, you won't allow them to get in between you and connecting to the people, right? And the people will feel connected to you, right? So it won't be a thing of, please go to that guy and tell him your problem, and then go through the proper channels. But yeah, so I think. So I don't know if I'm agreeing or disagreeing, but yes.
Yeah. To add on that, I think also the leaders who are on the ground and are supposed to be sort of relaying things to the top leaders are sort of also disconnected from the people.
Yes.
For instance, I don't know who my ward councillor is, in all honesty, and I've lived here for like 22 years, but I still don't know who or she is, who he or she is. Yeah. So, and it's not a matter of I didn't try to know. I've never seen them within the community, and I don't think they live within the community.
But can I ask, because I'm seeing a pattern now, do you think that there's something about African leadership that when someone gets power, that they disconnect themselves?
Like everyone has their own agenda.
Yeah, from the people. What is happening in that? Because it's just, I'm trying to figure it out.
Self-interest is a huge thing for us. And like, I think because a lot of our leaders have a story, and the story is normally connected to poverty. And I think that's also problematic. Because you get into a space where now you have everything. And it's either you're going to take everything or you're going to share. And I don't know if sharing is a thing you know how to do when you come from such a bracket or puppet. Yes,
yeah. I think also it goes back to that thing of you're seeing it as a job now and not as a public service or like public service in a way. It's now become a job to the point whereby you are disconnected to the people. Because I remember in the ward that I live in, the only time where like you would see your political parties or things is when it's election time. And after they get the job, the people are gone, which is why I say that it's very difficult for me to say that I know who the councillor in my ward is, because like I've never properly interacted with that person, and after they got the job, dololo, like.
Yeah, I also think it helps with this corrupt nature we have. This disconnect, I think, is what creates corruption, because when you have a disconnect, you're allowed to keep secrets, you're allowed to hide, and you're allowed to operate isolated, like alone. And this isolation in doing your jobs is what creates the problem. And I think so the way our leaders are formulated and get these positions allows for the corruption, because we don't hold them accountable, and they are free to do whatever they want, and that is fundamentally.
Do you guys think that the compensation they get maybe the problem? Like, so the high salaries that like people in parliament get and all, do you guys think that may be a problem? Like, compared to someone who's like a nurse or a teacher, like,
Yeah.
do you think these salaries are also an issue?
The money comes into play.
Yeah.
A lot.
Because some of these people are getting a lot of money, and then they have the blue light cars, and like it's just unnecessary stuff. Because like as a minister of like, I don't know, energy or stuff, transport, like no one's trying to like sniper you. So I understand why you need so much security. So yeah, no, the money thing is an issue for me, I feel.
Yeah, and I think it's what angers people mostly when problems erupt. And then you have your councillor coming in with a Mercedes, and we're like, we don't have water. You're coming in here with the whole Mercedes, or like security guards and things such as those, and you're like, the disconnection. It's like, it's even wider.
So we've touched on the Africa we want, 2063. We've talked about a better leadership, and we've talked about how we as a community need to try and improve, and how leadership should be public service rather than a career path. So I just want to wrap it up and talk about is the realist way of thinking the way that we should think as Africans, or should we be pessimistic about our continent, or should we be optimistic about our continent?
I'll say optimistic.
Okay.
We do have potential.
Okay.
And even in the bad situations, we've found ways to sort of adapt. They haven't obviously benefited everyone, but that, I think that in itself shows that there is some form of, there are people trying to make lives better for others, and I think that in itself should also be highlighted. Besides all the bad things going on with leadership and things such as those, there are those who are trying to make a difference within the system and within this sort of tradition of bad leadership which often occurs. So there is potential, but yeah, also maybe a revolution is what we need.
With the revolution though, are we gonna have, what is going to come out of it? Are we just not going to be in another situation where there's something again like this not being solved, or another leadership problem is being created?
Yeah, what do you mean by revolution?
I think I think as a country we can see, as South Africa, we can see that the current system or economic system that we currently have isn't necessarily beneficial to the least marginalized in society. Like, your people come from very, very poor conditioned backgrounds and stuff like that. So, and you'll find that it always like it finds new ways of recreating itself and to sort of keep itself going, either in education or within the workplace itself. And almost at the end of the day, knowing capitalism, someone has to be exploited. There has to be inequality some way or the other. So I do think that the first step would be, we need to change the system, but also, as I've mentioned before, when we're speaking about change, it must go beyond the politics and the economy. It must also find a way to trickle down to change maybe social norms and things such as those. So
I also think as a society we need more agency and like more knowledge in our agency. We shouldn't just be a radical voice, which I find a lot in our country. We're radically loud, but our agency does not exist in intellectual spaces a lot of the time, or in other spaces. We have a church problem in this country where churches boom and they are exploiting people, but no one is going to that issue, and that is a huge issue, which could be another conversation, because that is also a place of teaching. So I think our agency as society also needs to shift from one direction and needs to be everywhere, as you said, as a country and as a continent. I don't know.
I think for me, okay, coming back to whether we're being realist, pessimistic, or whatever, I'm a full-blown pessimist, you know, and I'm like unapologetic about it, because when I think of how the way the system functions, it's just structured for you to not succeed, especially if you're black, especially if you're a woman. Like, you are just not meant to succeed if you're poor. You know, that's capitalism, white supremacy, all of these kind of patriarchy. We can go on with a list of systems that are kind of oppressing us, you know, systematically. So I'm not quite optimistic about Africa's future. I'm sorry, but I'm really not. And I think touching on, you just talked about agency and places of teachings and whatever. I think for me the biggest thing is that as long as people all are acting in self-interest and not for the interest of society, betterment of society, we're never going to see change. That's why our leadership is the way that it is. It's because it's based on self-interest. And what teaches that, what influences that? It's capitalism. It tells you, you know, you need to do well, and you need to do well for yourself. You need to better yourself. You need to be this, that, and it must all be for you. It teaches you, consumerism teaches you that you need to better you, the way you look, what you eat, all of that. And it doesn't teach you that you need to better society as a whole, that you need to work, you know, for the person next to you. And that's an interesting conversation because it goes against African traditions, African culture, African, you know, values, you know what I mean? So we've forgotten all of that, and I think that's just the power of capitalism. It's
Can I just throw this question to you? So you have a pessimistic view, right?
Yes.
So then, what is your key to survive? Or is...
I'm just here for a good
just
time.
throw a
Wow.
I'm kidding. What's my key to survive? What, like life or the system?
Yeah.
Or what?
So then, if it is, as you say, you've pointed out all these problems and what it's rooted in. So in the next 10 years, what is going to motivate you to see tomorrow?
Like, I'm struggling now. Forget 10 years. I'm just kind of like constantly, what am I working for? You know, it's hard. Like, I don't really have an answer to that. Like, I just take every day as it comes, and I'm aware of my role in the system, you know, consciously and unconsciously, and how I'm an agent of it, but also trying to kind of oppose it in a way, but it's so difficult. So I guess that speaks to like, what agency do I have, you know, as an individual? But I don't know about that.
Yeah, because that's difficult.
I think that should be open to everyone.
Yeah,
to survival.
I will speak on that because I think it's difficult. Like, if you have a pessimistic view and it's fine, how am I gonna draw a 10-year plan? That's my question. That's why I've never adopted it, because I want to see myself in 10 years. So I wouldn't know where to start because I know there's so many things against me, and it would be foolish of me to dream that far. And I think then if we as a continent, we need to decide where we gonna be. Are we gonna be receivers of this problem, of this capitalist structure, of everything, or are we going to be opposers of it, or are we going to be part of stimulating it? And I think as South African or Africa, we have decided to tap into all of them. We are optimistic, we are pessimistic, and we are realists, and we are this, and we are socialists, and we are very capitalistic. So you can't dabble in all of them, and I think that's also a problem. So that's why I was just asking on like those points, where do we see ourselves as a continent or country? Because I think we need to decide one. Because we're either against the system, for it, or we playing, I don't know, with both sides. I don't know. It's difficult. It's tough. Do you have any? Are you a realist, pessimist, optimist?
Yes. I feel like I'm I don't know. Hey, like it's all just so different, and I
think
I'll
I'm
have
an
to think of
optimist and a realist. Yeah.
I
I can't be both. Let's have a realist.
Yeah.
I'll be a
Exclusive.
realist. I'll be a realist. I think, yeah, being realist, why I say that is because I can deal with the now and prevention. Because a lot of realist ideas is based on prevention of things. And I'd rather prevent an Africa that is destructive. So
True.
So yeah.
I still want to go back to the world to survive. What pushes you to survive every day?
Sorry, that was a hard question.
Yeah.
And can I just ask why I want to
Yeah.
know, because we're talking about like us as youth, right? And what our role is going to be, right, in the future or in the betterment of Africa and South Africa. I think that with a lot of millennials, we're feeling this fatigue of like, it doesn't matter what I do, the system is too powerful, I can't do anything, like I have no agency at all. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out, like, what is your will to survive? Like how do you draw up the 10-year plan that you're talking about if everything just seems pointless at this stage? Like you're constantly in an existential crisis, like why am I even in university if there's no jobs available?
That's still gonna
Still gonna have to
Yeah,
hustle.
Yeah, I think it's just living in the moment, I guess. And
But we can't do that anymore.
like everything's just unpredictable. Like you don't know what to expect. Like
Yeah.
you just hope for the best.
I think that's also why a lot of youth agencies depleted, because we think like that. We think that, okay, I'm in university, I'm getting this degree. As soon as I get it, I'm not gonna go get a job.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's say you get a job and you're like, okay, my salary is this. I cannot afford anything. So I think we consistently in a place of unhappiness or just disadvantage that we can't innovate or create.
And it's
something
like people are
better.
tired, so like they get to a point where they're just like,
I don't think we need to stop being tired. It's on us now. I honestly want to see something better.
I think also it's not necessarily that like we don't want to oppose the system. We want to, but then again, you have people to feed at home, and people who are dependent on you finishing this degree and getting a job and being part of the system. Whereas at the same time, you don't want to be in the system, and you're like, why must it come to this? So, yeah, it's a difficult situation to find ourselves in.
I don't think survival for the black man will ever die. And that's sad. So I hope for a better Africa. I want to see a better Africa. But I still need to keep into account that there's so many things against Africa that exist. And I think as a youth, we need to generally keep thinking about this and keep thinking about where we are going in order to create something better. And I hope that betterness is possible.
I want an Africa with change, an Africa with possibilities.
I think Africa has the potential to grow and groom great leaders that can take it to great heights if we go back to many of our African roots, many of our African traditions, and abandon many of the capitalist thinking that we have adopted. So, yeah, just seeking to better the next person and not just for self-interest.
I think the continent has a lot of potential, and we have shown some ways that we are able to unlock this potential and use it. Maybe not at a bigger stage, but we have shown somewhat. So I am quite optimistic about the future of Africa. And in terms of leadership, I would say we need a leadership that will serve people, leadership for the people instead of leadership for the bellies of those who are in charge. So yeah, and we need a leadership that trickles down. As the youth, we also must take a stand and also be part of the political conversation. And yeah, be more active politically and not just seek to transform the politics and economics, but the entire society.